On a calm August morning in 1941, a 22-year-old RAF ace signaled his wingman, peeled off from formation, and dove toward a column of German troops on a dusty French road. He was one of Britain's most celebrated fighter pilots, credited with 26 aerial victories. But within seconds of that dive, he vanished. No distress call, no wreckage, no body, no Spitfire, nothing. 80 years later, the question remains, what really happened to Flight Lieutenant Eric Sawn-Off Locke? You know, there's something haunting about a mystery that refuses to fade with time. I've spent years reading about the Second World War, listening to veterans' stories, and walking the memorials where their names are carved in stone. But some stories, some disappearances, they reach out across the decades and grab you by the heart. Eric Locke's story is one of those. It's not just about a missing plane or an unsolved case. It's about a young man who gave everything, quite literally everything, and left behind only questions and echoes. So today, I want to take you back. Back to the green hills of Shropshire, back to the frantic skies over Britain in 1940, and back to that final morning over France when one of the RAF's brightest stars simply vanished. This is a story about courage, about sacrifice, and about the thousands of young men who flew into the unknown and never came home. Eric Stanley Locke was born on the 2nd of March 1919 in the quiet village of Bayston Hill, just outside Shrewsbury in Shropshire. Now, if you've ever been to that part of England, you know it's the kind of place where life moves gently. Rolling green fields, stone cottages, church bells on Sunday mornings. It's countryside that feels timeless, peaceful, a world away from war. Eric came from a solid, respectable family. His father ran a successful business, and the Lockes were well regarded in the community. Young Eric was sent to Prestfelda School, a private preparatory school in Shrewsbury, where he received a good education. By all accounts, he was a normal lad, not particularly remarkable in the classroom, not obsessed with airplanes or dreams of flying. In fact, aviation wasn't even on his radar as a boy. He was just Eric, a Shropshire lad with his whole life ahead of him. But then, as the 1930s wore on and the storm clouds gathered over Europe, something began to stir in young men like Eric Locke. Duty, responsibility, the sense that perhaps ordinary life would have to wait. You see, when Hitler marched into Poland in September 1939, Britain declared war, and everything changed. Suddenly, the country needed pilots, thousands of them. The RAF Volunteer Reserve opened its doors wide, calling on young men to step forward, to learn to fly, to defend the realm. Eric Locke answered that call. Now, I want you to imagine what that must have been like. You're 20 years old, living in peaceful Shropshire, and suddenly the world is at war. Your country needs you, so you sign up, not because you've dreamed of dogfights and glory, but because it's the right thing to do. That's exactly what Eric did. In 1939, he joined the RAF Volunteer Reserve, and his life changed forever. The training was intense. Flying a Spitfire wasn't like driving a car. It required reflexes, coordination, courage, and a kind of calm under pressure that most of us can't even imagine. But Eric took to it. Maybe there was something in him that hadn't surfaced before, some instinct or gift that only revealed itself in the cockpit. Whatever it was, his instructors noticed. He was quick, sharp, fearless in the air. By the time he finished his training, Eric was posted to number 41 Squadron, flying Spitfires. And it was there, in the crucible of combat, that the quiet lad from Bayston Hill would become one of the greatest fighter aces Britain ever produced. But quiet country roots often give rise to unexpected heroes. The summer of 1940. Do you remember those days? Or perhaps you've heard the stories from fathers, uncles, older brothers who lived through it. The Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe roaring across the Channel in wave after wave, trying to pound Britain into submission, to clear the skies so Hitler could invade. And, standing in their way, just a few thousand RAF pilots, many of them barely out of their teens, flying Spitfires and Hurricanes against impossible odds. Churchill called them the few, and Eric Locke was among them. His first real taste of combat came on the 15th of August, 1940. That day, the Luftwaffe launched a massive assault on northern England, trying to hit airfields and infrastructure. Locke's squadron scrambled, and within minutes he was in the thick of it. Messerschmitt Bf-110, twin-engine fighters and Junkers, Ju-88 bombers filled the sky. For most pilots, their first combat is terrifying. Adrenaline, confusion, tracer rounds streaking past. But Eric Locke didn't freeze. He closed in on a Bf-110, opened fire, and sent it spiraling down in flames. Then he went after a Ju-88 and destroyed that too. 2 kills. On his first day of real combat. Now, you have to understand, shooting down an enemy aircraft isn't like the movies. It's not clean or easy. You're traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. Your plane is shaking, the enemy is shooting back, and you have maybe seconds to line up your shot. One mistake, one hesitation, and you're the one going down. But Eric had something special. His reflexes were razor sharp. His shooting was precise. And his aggression, well, that's what really set him apart. While some pilots would break off or play it cautious, Eric pressed the attack. He got in close, sometimes dangerously close, and he didn't stop firing until the enemy was finished. His fellow pilots nicknamed him Sawn Off. Though some say it was because of his short stature, others claim it referred to his cut-down, no-nonsense flying style. Either way, the name stuck. Through August, September, and into October 1940, Eric Locke racked up victory after victory. Bf-109s, Bf-110s, bombers. He shot them down with a consistency that was almost eerie. His score climbed rapidly. 5, 10, 15, 20. By the end of October, he had been officially credited with 21 enemy aircraft destroyed, making him the top-scoring Allied ace of the entire Battle of Britain. Think about that for a moment. Out of all the pilots in Fighter Command, British, Polish, Czech, New Zealanders, Canadians, this 21-year-old from Shropshire was the deadliest. But glory in the sky comes at a price on the ground. November 1940. The Battle of Britain was winding down, but the fighting was far from over. On the 17th of November, Eric Locke was flying a patrol over East Sussex when his squadron was jumped by a groupie of Messerschmitt Bf-109s, some of the Luftwaffe's best fighters, flown by experienced German aces. A savage dogfight erupted. Locke engaged, as he always did, aggressively. But this time, the odds caught up with him. A burst of cannon fire from a Bf-109 ripped into his Spitfire. The cockpit disintegrated around him. Shrapnel tore into his body. His right arm was shattered. Both legs were badly wounded, and he was bleeding heavily. His plane was falling apart, controls barely responding. Most pilots in that situation would have bailed out, but Eric was too low and possibly too injured to jump. So, with one arm useless and his legs screaming in agony, he somehow managed to wrestle the crippled Spitfire down and crash land in a field. He was pulled from the wreckage, barely conscious, and rushed to hospital. What followed was months of excruciating recovery. Eric underwent 15 separate surgeries. 15. They had to rebuild his arm, reconstruct his legs, piece him back together bit by bit. He spent time at RAF Halton, then at the Royal Masonic Hospital in London, surrounded by other wounded airmen. This was where he became part of what they called the Guinea Pig Club, a group of pilots and aircrew who underwent pioneering reconstructive surgery under the famous surgeon Sir Archibald Macindoe. These men, many of them horribly burned or broken, supported each other through unimaginable pain and long, uncertain recoveries. While Eric was still on crutches, still healing, the RAF awarded him the Distinguished Service Order, one of the highest decorations for gallantry. The citation praised his exceptional courage and skill. But for Eric, lying in a hospital bed, I imagine the medal meant less than the thought burning in his mind. When can I fly again? Most would have retired after such wounds, but Locke wasn't most pilots. By the summer of 1941, incredibly, Eric Locke was back in the cockpit, back on operations. His body might have been held together with surgical pins and scars, but his spirit, his determination, was unbroken. The RAF promoted him to flight lieutenant and transferred him to No. 611 Squadron, another Spitfire unit, and he kept fighting. Over northern France, he engaged Bf 109s and scored more victories, proving that his skills hadn't diminished. If anything, he seemed even more driven, as if he had something to prove, to himself, to the enemy, maybe to fate itself. His comrades admired him. How could they not? Here was a man who had every reason to step back, to take a desk job or an instructing post, but instead chose to return to the most dangerous job in the world. He was living on borrowed time, and perhaps deep down he knew it. But fate was waiting not in the skies, but on the ground. August 3rd, 1941. A warm summer morning. The kind of morning where, if there hadn't been a war on, you might have gone for a walk in the countryside or sat in a garden with a cup of tea. But there was a war on, and that morning, Eric Locke and his squadron were tasked with a rhubarb mission over northern France. Now, for those unfamiliar with the term, a rhubarb was a low-level strafing and reconnaissance sortie. Small groups of fighters sneaking across the channel to shoot up enemy targets on the ground. Trains, trucks, troop columns, anything that moved. It was dangerous work. Flying low and slow made you vulnerable to ground fire, and there was always the risk of running into enemy fighters. That morning, somewhere over the Pas-de-Calais region, Eric spotted a column of German troops moving along a road. He signaled his wingman, banked his Spitfire over, and dove toward the column to strafe it with his machine guns. His wingman watched him go down. That was the last time anyone ever saw Flight Lieutenant Eric Stanley Locke. No distress call crackled over the radio. No parachute was seen drifting down. No explosion, no crash, no smoke. One moment he was there, diving toward the enemy, and the next, he was just gone, vanished into thin air. His wingman circled, searching, but saw nothing. The rest of the squadron returned to base, shaken and confused. Where was Locke? Had he been hit? Had he gone down? Surely there would be something. Wreckage, a parachute, something. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. When Eric Locke didn't return from that mission, the RAF immediately listed him as missing. But for the men who flew with him, missing felt like an inadequate word. How could someone just disappear? This wasn't the empty vastness of the Atlantic or the Pacific. This was northern France, populated, fought over ground. If a Spitfire went down, someone would have seen it. Someone would have found wreckage, wouldn't they? But for the RAF, a missing ace was not a mystery they could ignore. In the days and weeks that followed, the RAF launched inquiries. They interviewed Locke's wingman and the other pilots on the mission. They reviewed intelligence reports from France, looking for any German claims of a Spitfire shot down on that date in that area. They cross-referenced everything they had, but the trail was frustratingly cold. Locke's Spitfire that day was MACV, serial number W3257. A beautiful machine, fast and deadly. But now it was gone, and so was its pilot. As the weeks turned to months and no new information surfaced, the grim reality began to set in. Eric Locke was almost certainly dead. The question was, where? After the war ended in 1945, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission undertook the massive task of locating and identifying the remains of missing servicemen. Across Europe, teams searched crash sites, examined records, exhumed graves. They found thousands. But they didn't find Eric Locke. His body wasn't in any German military cemetery. His plane wasn't in any known crash site. It was as if he and his Spitfire had been erased from existence. And yet, a mystery like this was bound to stir speculation. Over the decades, various theories emerged, each trying to explain the inexplicable. The first, and perhaps most straightforward theory, was that Eric had been hit by ground fire during his strafing run. Anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, even rifle fire from the German troops he was attacking. Any of those could have struck his plane. If the hit was catastrophic, the Spitfire might have exploded in midair, scattering wreckage over a wide area. Small fragments could easily have been overlooked, especially in the chaos of occupied France during the wartime. Another theory suggested that he crashed into the English Channel. If his plane was damaged and he tried to make it back to England but didn't quite make it, he could have ditched in the water. The Channel is cold and unforgiving, and countless aircraft rest on its seabed. A Spitfire sinking in deep water might never be found, especially in 1941, when search and rescue capabilities were limited. Then there's the German ace Johann Schmid. After the war, Schmid's logbook was examined, and it showed that he claimed a Spitfire shot down near Calais on August 3, 1941, the same day Locke disappeared. At first, this seemed like the answer. Finally, confirmation. But there was a problem. Schmid's logbook listed the time of his victory as 18. That's 6 in the evening. Locke's mission had been in the morning, hours apart. So unless the records were wrong, Schmid's victim was a different pilot, a different Spitfire. Some French locals interviewed years later recalled seeing a plume of smoke rising from near a forest that August day. They spoke of hearing the roar of engines and the rattle of gunfire, then seeing smoke. But memories fade, and wartime France was full of smoke and gunfire. Without physical evidence, these accounts remained tantalizing but unverifiable. The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened in those final seconds. Did a bullet find the fuel tank? Did flak bring him down? Did he crash in a place so remote or so altered by time and farming that the wreckage simply vanished into the earth? All we have is that moment his wingman saw Eric Locke diving toward the enemy, disappearing into the chaos of war. Yet, amid the fog of war, there were still lives touched forever. Eric Locke wasn't just a name on a list or a number in a logbook. He was a real person. He had a family back in Bayston Hill who waited for news that never came. He had friends, fellow pilots, ground crew who knew him, who joked with him, who mourned him. He was a symbol, too, a symbol of Britain's fighting spirit during its darkest hour. Think about what he represented. Here was a young man, privately educated, from a comfortable background, who could have perhaps found a way to avoid the worst of the fighting. But he didn't. He volunteered. He threw himself into battle again and again. He was shot down, horribly wounded, and still came back for more. That kind of courage, that kind of dedication, it inspired his generation and continues to inspire ours. Eric Locke was one of 3 top-scoring RAF aces lost in mysterious circumstances during 1941 and 1942. The other 2 were Douglas Bader, the legless ace who was shot down and captured over France, and Paddy Finucane, the Irish ace who ditched in the Channel and was never seen again. These men were legends, heroes, faces on propaganda posters. Their loss was felt not just by their squadrons, but by the entire nation. And for those who remembered him, silence was not the end. After the war, as Britain rebuilt and remembered, memorials began to appear. The Runnymede Memorial, overlooking the Thames in Surrey, was dedicated in 1953. It's a solemn, beautiful place, with names carved into Portland stone panels, the names of 2,400 airmen from the Commonwealth who died during the Second World War and have no known grave. Eric Stanley Locke's name is there. Panel 40. Flight Lieutenant. No, 611 Squadron. Died 3rd August 1941. Age 22. When you stand there and read those names, row after row, panel after panel, it's overwhelming. Each name is a story. Each name is a family that grieved. Each name is a life cut short. And somewhere among those thousands is the boy from Bayston Hill who became an ace and vanished over France. But Runnymede wasn't the only place that remembered him. Back home in Shropshire, the community that raised him made sure he wouldn't be forgotten. Prestfeld School, where Eric was educated, installed a memorial plaque in his honor. Condover Church, not far from Bayston Hill, has a beautiful stained glass window dedicated to him, and in Bayston Hill itself there's a road named after him, Eric Locke Road. Every day people drive down that road, perhaps not knowing the story behind the name, but the name is there. A quiet, permanent reminder. But why does this story endure 8 decades later? I think there are a few reasons. First, there's the mystery itself. Human beings are drawn to unsolved puzzles, to questions without answers. What happened to Eric Locke? Where is his Spitfire? Will we ever know? These questions linger, and they keep the story alive. But it's more than just curiosity. Eric Locke embodies something essential about the Second World War, and about the men and women who fought it. He represents the ordinary people who did extraordinary things. He wasn't a career officer or a professional soldier. He was a young man from a small village who answered his country's call and became a hero. His story reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's pressing on despite fear. It's getting back in the cockpit after being shot to pieces. It's diving toward the enemy one more time, even when you've already given so much. For those of us who study history, who listen to veterans, who visit memorials, Locke's story is also a powerful reminder of the cost of war. We talk about victories and battles won, but behind every victory are names like Eric Locke. Young men who never got to grow old, never got to have families, never got to live the lives they deserved. The Battle of Britain was won, yes, but it was won with the lives of people like him. And in that silence comes a final message. Standing at Runnymede, or walking down Eric Locke Road, or reading his name in a history book, you realize that remembrance is a kind of defiance against oblivion. The wreckage may be gone, the body may never be found, but the story remains. The sacrifice remains, the courage remains. Eric Locke was 22 years old when he vanished. 22. Think about that. At an age when most young people today are just finishing university, just starting careers, just beginning to figure out life. He was already a decorated war hero and he was gone. He flew 26 confirmed missions. He scored 26 victories. He faced death over and over and never flinched. And then, on a summer morning in 1941, he flew into legend. His final dive over Pas de Calais is a chapter written in the wind and remembered by generations. We don't know where his Spitfire rests, we don't know where his body lies, but we know what he did, we know what he gave. And that, in the end, is what matters most. I sometimes wonder what Eric Locke might have become if he'd survived the war. Would he have stayed in the RAF? Would he have returned to Shropshire, settled down, raised a family? Would he have told his grandchildren stories about flying Spitfires over England in 1940? We'll never know. That future was taken from him on a French road 80 years ago. But in another way, he's still here. Every time someone visits Runnymede and pauses at his name. Every time a historian writes about the Battle of Britain and includes his story. Every time someone like me stands in front of a camera and tells you about a 22-year-old ace who refused to quit, even when his body was broken, Eric Locke is still here. And that's the power of remembrance. That's why we tell these stories. Not to glorify war. War is terrible, wasteful, tragic. But to honor the individuals who faced it with courage and sacrifice. To make sure they're not just statistics or footnotes, but real people with real stories. So if stories like these matter to you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because behind every forgotten wreck, every missing pilot, is a story that deserves to be told. Eric Locke's Spitfire is still out there somewhere, maybe buried deep in French soil, maybe resting on the floor of the Channel, maybe scattered in pieces long since reclaimed by nature. Someday, perhaps, a farmer will turn up a fragment of metal, or a diver will spot a familiar shape in the murky water. Maybe his final resting place will be found, maybe not. But even if it never is, we have something the earth can't bury and the sea can't hide. We have his story. We have his name. We have the memory of a young man from Shropshire who became one of the finest fighter pilots of his generation, who fought when the world needed fighters, and who gave everything, quite literally everything, in defense of freedom. Flight Lieutenant Eric Stanley Locke, DSO, DFC and Bar. Born March 2, 1919. Lost August 3, 1941. Age 22, top-scoring Allied ace of the Battle of Britain. 26 victories, no known grave. Gone, but never, ever forgotten. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And if you've made it this far, I hope you'll share this story with someone else. Because every time we speak their names, every time we tell their stories, they fly again. Until next time, remember the past, honor the sacrifice, and never forget.